Great question. Thanks for asking. Nevertheless, to avoid fornication, let every man have his own wife, and let every woman have her own husband. Neither shall he multiply wives unto himself. And you know what's interesting? This is specifically direction and commandment given to kings. There's a lot of Christian apologetics that say, oh, well, the kings like King David were allowed to have multiple wives by God because they were so rich they could take care of the women. No, this was specific commandment to kings to not multiply wives. And this scripture precedes King David, therefore King David is in direct defiance of this commandment. Which is why Jacob 1 and 2 clarify that King David was indulgent in wicked practices by having many wives and concubines. God could not be more clear in Jacob 2:24, calling David and Solomon wicked and abominable because they had many wives. You imply that God commanded the Jews to be polygamists as well. Well, in 25, he clarifies that God led Lehi away from Jerusalem to stop practicing those wicked practices, to not do like them of old. The Jews rejected Christ. They do not follow his commandments. And here in 27, he clarifies the law of monogamy. Do not have more than one wife. And don't even come at me with verse 30, trying to say that if God commands it, he will command polygamy. Otherwise, they should hearken unto these things as in monogamy. Because every single time this chapter says thing, it's saying the thing of abomination of polygamy. Meaning if people aren't hearkening to his commandment, they end up being polygamists. I have 2 entire videos, scroll down a tiny bit on my page, about how Jacob 2, the entire chapter, denounces polygamy, and there is no loophole. You claim that a concubine isn't a slave, she's just a wife of a secondary status. And I said, well, okay, if you actually think about that, that means that God would say that this wife is eternally less than. You said, no, the ranks of heaven in celestial marriage and the ranks of the wives is different in heaven. And it's that I asked references for. You have 0 scriptural references for that. And I'm giving you all of the scriptural references for monogamy. And on that note of celestial marriage and how it might differ in heaven, let's read the words of Jesus. When they asked him if a wife married 7 of the brothers, which one gets her in heaven? He answered, none are given in marriage or marry in heaven. So maybe instead of trying to justify if David or any other king or polygamist was right or wrong or what they did, maybe we should listen to the words of Jesus. To wrap it up, it says that marriage is honorable, but it should be undefiled, without whoremongers and adulterers. Polygamy is consistently described in the scriptures as a fornication and an abomination. It's not sometimes a commandment and sometimes forbidden. Jesus is the same yesterday, today, and forever. He does not change.
1 Corinthians 7 doesn't exclude polygamy. In fact, later on in verse 6, he says he's giving it as means of permission, not by commandment. Fascinating.
You have this smug smile on your face and you're like laughing that you got me, you proved me wrong. And like the grim smugness is annoying, first of all, but I feel bad for you because you're completely wrong. After Paul teaches that you can have one wife or one husband, Paul teaches that this is a permission, not a commandment. He continues, for I would that all men were even as myself. I say therefore to the unmarried and the widowed, it is good that you abide even as myself. Paul was giving an exception to being single. He said you can be single or you can be married to one wife. Paul was not married. Paul clarified that to everybody because he was talking to some of the apostles. And in Jewish tradition, remember how you justified polygamy because Jews are polygamists? In Jewish tradition, in order to be a rabbi, it was required that you were married. So he's clarifying that you can be a disciple of God, you can follow Jesus Christ, and you don't have to be married, but if you are, marry one woman. And do you realize that this also is in contradiction to the teachings of D&C 132 and many, many discourses by Brigham Young, who said that you must be a polygamist to enter heaven, that only polygamists will get exalted? This is just another example of another doctrinal fallacy and inconsistency with claims made in D&C 132. These claims cannot be backed up by biblical references, or even Book of Mormon references. Another example of doctrinal fallacy in 132 is the fact that verse 1 claims that Isaac was a polygamist. Please show me any verse in the Bible that says Isaac was a polygamist. He wasn't. But you know what does back up this teaching is Joseph Smith's actual writings and teachings, his contemporary writings that were not altered after he died. This was the original Section 101 in the Book of Commandments, published in 1833. This was the only official church marriage doctrine until Brigham Young introduced the forgery of Section 132 in 1852, and he removed the Section 101 in 1876 when he inserted Section 132 into the Doctrine and Covenants. Now, if you're going to argue about Section 132 or Jacob 2 again, please go watch my videos on Section 132 being a forgery and Jacob 2 denouncing polygamy. But here's the thing. I know that I will never convince you. It's not my job to convince you, and nobody will ever convince you of anything that you don't want to believe. The only reason that I have this testimony is because I prayed to God and I asked him to teach me truth and find it in the scriptures. I asked him to show me truth regardless of my confirmation bias. I didn't want him to just show me what I thought was right. I wanted him to show me truth regardless of what I believed or what I thought was true.